Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Philip Munoz. I am the Tocqueville Associate Professor of Political Science and a concurrent Associate Professor at the law school, and I have the pleasure of serving as director of the Tocqueville Program for Inquiry into Religion and Public Life. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to our inaugural Tocqueville Lecture on Religious Liberty. The Tocqueville Program was founded in 2009. Our mission and aim is to foster teaching and scholarship and research on the proper role of religion in our public life. We hold conferences, symposia here on campus. We sponsor research that informs and influences our national conversation, really our international conversations about the principles of just government and our first freedom, the principles of religious liberty. For the undergraduate students here today, I encourage you to get to know us and especially get to know some of our Tocqueville Fellows. We have an undergraduate fellowship program. We select a handful, students apply, and every year we select a handful of fellows to be Tocqueville Fellows, T-Fellows as I call them. And our fellows plan our seminars, they host their own events, they meet and interact with our distinguished guests. The fellows will have a breakfast seminar with Archbishop Chaput tomorrow morning. It's a wonderful program, and we put the fellows at the center of everything we do, so those undergraduates here who are meeting us for the first time, please come and get to know us. I also encourage our undergraduates to get to know our sister program, the Tocqueville Program sister program, the Potenziani program in Constitutional Studies, which I also direct. We have a minor here in Constitutional Studies, in which we study fundamental questions of law and justice, with a particular emphasis on our America's founding principles. You can also like us on Facebook and find out about our events. I mentioned the Tocqueville Fellows, and we really do try to place our undergraduate students at the center of everything we do, and including introducing our speakers. So towards that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Kate Hardiman. Kate is a senior from Pennsylvania. If memory serves me right, she's a 3-year Tocqueville Fellow, I think our only 3-year Tocqueville Fellow, so apparently we really like you, Kate. And Kate is going to introduce our lecturer today. Thank you very much for coming. Kate?
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Kate Hardiman, and I'm a senior entering my 3rd year as a Tocqueville Fellow. It has been a delight to participate in this program that provides such deep inquiry into religion and public life for both our undergraduate students and Notre Dame community as a whole. Today, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce the Most Reverend Charles Chaput, Archbishop of Philadelphia, who will deliver the 2016 Tocqueville Lecture on Religious Liberty. Archbishop Chaput previously was Bishop of Rapid City, South Dakota, and Archbishop of Denver, Colorado. He has served on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and on numerous boards, including that of the Catholic University of America and the National Catholic Bioethics Center. Currently, Archbishop Chaput chairs the Subcommittee on Native American Catholics for the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. A member of the Prairie Band Potawatomi tribe, Archbishop Chaput was the 2nd Native American to be ordained a bishop in the United States and the 1st Native American archbishop. He is the author of 2 books, Living the Catholic Faith, Rediscovering the Basics, and Render unto Caesar, Serving the Nation by Living Our Catholic Beliefs in Political Life. I'm halfway through Render unto Caesar, and I do think that it is an excellent work, so highly recommend it to all of you. He is completing a 3rd book called Strangers in a Strange Land, which will be published in February. In the spirit of his talk today, the preface to Render unto Caesar is worth quoting. The Archbishop writes, "Religious freedom is humanity's first and most important freedom. Our first governor is God, our creator, the governor of the universe. We are created for a religious purpose. We have a religious destiny. Our right to pursue this destiny precedes the state. Any attempt to restrict our right to worship, preach, teach, practice, organize, and peacefully engage society because of our belief in God is an attack not only on the cornerstone of human dignity, but also on the identity of the American experiment. The title of today's lecture is Sex, Family, and the Liberty of the Church, Authentic Freedom in Our Emancipated Age. Please join me in giving a warm Notre Dame welcome to Archbishop Charles Chaput.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Kate. Before I begin, I'd like to apologize for my voice. I came down with a cold a couple days ago, and I was afraid I was going to lose my voice. As I've gotten older, I tend to get laryngitis when I get a cold. But I prayed hard to St. Blaise, and I still can talk. So I hope that my voice doesn't fail during the course of our conversation. One of the members of our audience today looks like Cardinal Dulles. It's the gentleman here. Did anyone ever tell you look like Cardinal Dulles? Okay. I was almost, what's he doing? He's been dead for a number of years. What is he doing here? You know, so. So this morning I was warmly welcomed by President Jenkins to his office. I'd never been in the Dome building before. It's a really extraordinary building. And I'd never had an opportunity to meet the president of the university. He was very kind and welcoming, as has been Dr. Munoz. So I want to thank the university, the Tocqueville program, Father Jenkins, and all of you who are part of this wonderful community, and especially to thank the donors to the Tocqueville program that made today's presentation possible, but more importantly, made the Tocqueville program itself possible. So thank you very, very much. It's genuinely a pleasure to be here with you. Perhaps a little personal word before I get into the heart of the matter. I am a direct descendant of Pierre Navarre, who was the first white settler into St. Joseph County, Indiana, where this university is located. He married an Indian woman of Potawatomi by the name of Angelique Ketchiquay, who was my great-grandmother 6 generations back. Now, the reason I mention this is because you took our land and I want it back. And I thought I would make that claim at the beginning of my presentation, and I'll repeat it often so that it begins to get into the system of people who are part of the school's administration. So, but you know, the Potawatomis were moved from here to Iowa and then to Kansas, and then some of them went off to Oklahoma. But this was Potawatomi land, and I'm, of course, very proud of my ancestry. The reason I'm a bishop is because my mother was an Indian. I mean, it is genuinely true. It was back in the days of affirmative action, where they were appointing bishops who were black and Hispanic, and there were just a couple of us who were Indians. But otherwise, I wouldn't be a bishop. And, well, it's true. And it's so nice to be able to be back where it all began. So, go Notre Dame. So. A lecture named after Alexis de Tocqueville will naturally involve politics. That's a good thing, and we'll have plenty to talk about. But I don't want to begin there today. I spent much of last week, actually it's been 10 days ago now, helping my brother and his wife with the funeral of their daughter, Allison, my niece. She was to be married on October the 1st. She was bright, beautiful, and an extraordinarily talented young lady. She was a nurse. In May, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and died rather quickly after that. And she died a week ago Friday, and then we had the funeral this past Friday in Kansas, where I'm from. Now, I mention this not to cast a shadow on our discussion today. In fact, quite the opposite. She had a great life. She was well-loved and had lots of joy in her experiences. and that love and joy will continue to live in my family and in the people who knew her. I mention Allison because the farthest thing from anyone's mind as she and we measured her life last month was politics. Leon Bloy, the great French Catholic convert, once said that in the end, the only thing that matters is to be a saint. That's the ultimate task of a place like Notre Dame. It's not to help you get into law school, or to go to a great medical school, or to find a great job on Wall Street, as good as those things clearly are. It's to help you get into heaven, which is not some imaginary fairyland, but an eternity of life in the presence of a loving God. If you don't believe that, you're in the wrong place. Life is a gift, not an accident, and the point of a life is to become the kind of fully human person who knows and loves God above everything else and reflects that love to others. That's the only compelling reason for a university to call itself Catholic. And it's a privilege for Notre Dame to be part of that vocation. My comments this afternoon are simple. They come in three parts. I want to speak first about the impending election. Then we'll move to the theme of today's talk, sex, family, and the liberty of the church. Then we'll touch on a few things we might want to remember going forward as Catholic Christians. I come from a place, Pennsylvania, where the state attorney general was just convicted of 9 felonies. The FBI is investigating Philadelphia's district attorney. Philadelphia's 2nd District U.S. Congressman, Chaput, was forced to resign and then convicted of racketeering and influence peddling. And several members of the state assembly from the Philadelphia area, as well as 3 state Supreme Court justices, were caught in various scandals. This has all happened just in the 5 years I've been Archbishop of Philadelphia. I must be a very bad influence. Philadelphia has its own Wikipedia category, Pennsylvania politicians convicted of crimes, with 58 separate entries. But the really curious thing about listing these bad actors is this: they're familiar. They're almost reassuring in the modesty of their appetites and lack of imagination. Selling your state assembly vote for the price of a necklace is wrong, but it's hardly the new kind of bad behavior, and it doesn't shake the foundations of the republic. Regrettably, other things do. I turn 72 later this month. I've been voting since 1966. That's exactly 50 years. And in that half century, the major parties have never, at the same time, offered 2 such deeply flawed presidential candidates. The 1972 Nixon-McGovern race comes close, but 2016 wins the crown. Only God knows the human heart, so I presume that both major candidates for the White House this year intend well and have a reasonable level of personal decency behind their public images. But I also believe that each candidate is very bad news for our country, though in different ways. One candidate, in the view of lots of people, is a belligerent demagogue with an impulse control problem. And the other, also in the view of a lot of people, is a criminal liar, uniquely rich in stale ideas and bad priorities. So where does this leave us? The historian Henry Adams once described the practice of politics as, quote, the systematic organization of hatreds. And there's plenty in our current political season that invites cynicism. But Christians don't have an option. We're not allowed the luxury of cynicism for at least 5 reasons. Number one, too many honest public officials already exist who do serve our country well. We need to believe that because it's true. Also because some of you need to take their place. Second, even in a year of bad presidential choices, good candidates for other public offices exist in both major parties. At the class I participated in this morning, one of the students recommended that I encourage people to go to vote even if they don't like the presidential candidates because so much else is at stake. Third, if Christians leave the public square, other people with much worse intentions won't. The surest way to make the country suffer is to not contest them in public debate and in the voting booth. Fourth, the essence of a Christian life, as Pope Francis reminds us, is hope and joy, not despair. The choices we make and the actions we take do make a difference. Like Benedict and John Paul II before him, Francis sees politics, rightly lived, as a vehicle for justice, charity, and mercy. The political vocation matters because, done well, it can ennoble the society it serves. Fifth and finally, Christians are not of the world, but we're most definitely in it. St. Augustine would say that our home is the city of God, but we get there by passing through the city of man. While we're on the road, we have a duty to leave the world better than we found it. One of the ways we do that, however imperfectly, is through politics. In other words, elections do matter. They matter a lot. The next president will appoint several Supreme Court justices, make vital foreign policy decisions, and shape the huge federal administrative machinery in ways over which Congress has little control. It's good to remember that Congress didn't create the politically vindictive HHS mandate that the church is suffering under today. The Obama White House did that. But here's my larger point. We've reached a moment when our political thinking and vocabulary as a nation seems exhausted. The real effect that we as individuals have on a government and political class that claims to represent us, that big mechanical golem we call Washington, is so slight that it breeds indifference and anger. As Christians, then, our political engagement needs to involve more than just wringing our hands and whining about the ugly choices we face in November, which I've been doing. It needs to be more than a search for better candidates and policies or shrewder slogans. The task of renewing a society is much more long-term than a trip every few years to the voting booth, and it requires a different kind of people. It demands that we be different kinds of people. Augustine said that complaining about the times makes no sense because we are the times. And that means, in turn, that changing the country means, first, changing ourselves. So what does any of this have to do with sex, family, and the liberty of the church? I'll answer the question this way. I've been a priest for 46 years. During that time, I've heard something more than 12,000 personal confessions and done hundreds of spiritual direction sessions. That's a lot of listening. When you spend several thousand hours of your life, as most priests do, hearing the failures and hurts in people's lives, men who beat their wives, women who cheat on their husbands, the addicts to porn or alcohol or drugs, thieves, the hopeless, the self-satisfied, and the self-hating, you get a pretty good picture of the world as it really is and its effect on the human soul. The confessional is more real than any reality show because nobody's watching. It's just you, God, and the penitents, and the sufferings they bring with them. As a priest, what's most striking to me about the last 5 decades is the huge spike in people, both men and women, confessing promiscuity, infidelity, sexual violence, and sexual confusion as an ordinary part of life, and the massive role of pornography in wrecking marriages, families, and even the vocations of clergy and religious. In a sense, this shouldn't surprise us. Sex is powerful. We've all experienced that. Sex is attractive. We've experienced that too. Sex is a basic appetite and human instinct. Our sexuality is tied intimately to who we are, how we search for love and happiness, how we defeat the pervasive loneliness in life, and for most people, how we claim some little bit of permanence in a world and its story by having children. The reason Pope Francis so forcefully rejects gender theory is not just because it lacks scientific support, though it certainly has that problem. Gender theory is a kind of metaphysics that subverts the very nature of sexuality by denying the male-female complementarity encoded in our bodies. In doing that, it attacks a basic building block of human identity and meaning, and by extension, the foundation of human social organization, the family. But let's get back to the confessional. Listening to people's sexual sins in the sacrament of penance is hardly new news. But the scope, the novelty, the violence, and the compulsiveness of the sins are. And remember that people only come to confession when they already have some sense of right and wrong, when they already understand, at least dimly, that they need to change their lives and seek God's mercy. And there's so many other people who don't even begin to think that way. The word mercy is worth examining. Mercy is one of the defining and most beautiful qualities of God. Pope Francis rightly calls us to incarnate it in our own lives this year. Unfortunately, it is also a word we can easily misuse to avoid the hard work of moral reasoning and judgment. Mercy means nothing. It's just an exercise in sentimentality without clarity about moral truth. We can't show mercy to someone who owes us nothing, someone who's done nothing wrong. Mercy implies a pre-existing act of injustice that must be corrected. And satisfying justice requires a framework of higher truth about human meaning and behavior. It requires an understanding of truth that establishes some things as good and others as evil, some things as life-giving and others as destructive. Here's why that's important. The truth about our sexuality is that infidelity, promiscuity, sexual confusion, and mass pornography by tens of millions of persons over 5 decades destroys lives. Destroys lives. Then compounded with media nonsense about the innocence of casual sex and the happy children of friendly divorces. What you get is what we now have, a dysfunctional culture of frustrated and wounded people, increasingly incapable of permanent commitments, self-sacrifice, and sustained intimacy, and unwilling to face the reality of their own problems. This has political consequences. People unwilling to rule their appetites will inevitably be ruled by them. And eventually, they'll be ruled by someone else. People too weak to sustain faithful relationships are also too weak to be free. Sooner or later, they surrender themselves to a state that compensates for their narcissism and immaturity with its own form of social control. People too worried or self-focused to welcome new life, to bear and raise children in a loving family, and to form them in virtue and moral character, are writing themselves out of the human story. They're extinguishing their own future. This is what makes the resistance of so many millennials to having children so troubling. There's all kinds of articles being written about this today, that the millennial community is not interested in intimate sexual relationships with others. They prefer their imaginations. The future, my dear friends, belongs to people who believe in something beyond themselves and who live and sacrifice accordingly. It belongs to people who think and hope intergenerationally. If you want a portrait of what I mean, consider this. The most common name given to newborn male babies in London for the past 4 years in a row is Mohammed. This in the city of Thomas More. In contrast between the Christians, post-Christians, and the Muslim community. Weak and selfish individuals make weak and selfish marriages. Weak and selfish marriages make broken families. And broken families continue and spread the cycle of dysfunction. They do it by creating more and more wounded individuals. A vast amount of social data shows that children from broken families are much more likely to live in poverty, to be poorly educated, and to have more emotional and physical health problems than children from intact families. In other words, when healthy marriages and families decline, the social costs rise. The family is where children discover how to be human. It's where they learn how to respect and love other people, where they see their parents sacrificing for the common good of the household, and where they discover their place in a family story larger than themselves. Raising children is beautiful, but also hard work, as many of you know. It's a task for unselfish, devoted parents. And parents need the friendship and support of other like-minded parents. It takes parents to raise a child, not a legion of professional experts, as helpful as they can sometimes be. Only a mother and a father can provide the intimacy of maternal and paternal love. Many single parents do a heroic job of raising good children, and they deserve our admiration and praise. But only a mother and a father can offer the unique kind of human love rooted in flesh and blood, the kind that comes from mutual submission and self-giving, the kind that comes from the complementarity of sexual difference. No parents do this perfectly. Some fail badly. Too often, the nature of modern American life helps and encourages them to fail. But in trying, parents pass along to the next generation an absolutely basic truth. It's the truth that things like love, faith, trust, patience, understanding, tenderness, fidelity, and courage really do matter, and they provide the foundation for a fully human life. Of course, some of the worst pressures on family life come from outside the home. They come in the form of unemployment, low pay, crime, poor housing, chronic illness, and bad schools. These are vitally important issues with real human consequences. And in Catholic thought, government has a role to play in easing such problems, but not if a government works from a crippled idea of who man is, what marriage is, and what a family is, and not if a government deliberately shapes its policies to interfere with and control the mediating institutions in civil society that already serve the public well, the family and the church. Yet this could arguably describe many of the current administration's actions over the past 7 years. The counterweight to intrusive government is a populace of mature citizens who push back and defend the autonomy of their civil space. The problem with a consumer economy, though, the one that we have, as Christopher Lasch saw nearly 40 years ago, is that it creates and relies on dependent, self-absorbed consumers. It needs and breeds what Lasch calls a culture of narcissism. Forgetful of the past, addicted to the present, and disinterested in the future. And it's hard to argue with the evidence. In his inaugural speech of 1961, John Fitzgerald Kennedy could still tell Americans quite confidently to, quote, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Today, I wonder how many of us might find his words not only naive and annoying, but an inversion of priorities. If we want strong families, we need strong men and women to create and sustain them with maturity and love. And as a family of families, the church is no different. The church is strong when her families and individual sons and daughters are strong, when they believe what she teaches, and then witness her message with courage and zeal. She's weak when her people are too tepid or comfortable, too eager to fit in, or frankly too afraid of public disapproval to see the world as it really is. The church is ours only in the sense that we belong to her as our mother and teacher in the family of God. But the church doesn't really belong to us. We belong to her. And the church in turn belongs to Jesus Christ, who guarantees her freedom, whether Caesar likes it or not. The church is free, regardless, even in the worst persecution. She's free even when many of her children desert her. She's free because God does exist, and the church depends not on numbers or resources, but on her fidelity to God's word. But her practical liberty, her credibility and effectiveness here and now in our wider society depends on us. So we should turn to that issue in the time remaining. In his classic work, Democracy in America, Tocqueville noted that the success of American democracy depended, in large part, on the strong American attachment to family and religious faith. In effect, families and the church stand between the individual and the state. They protect the autonomy of the individual by hemming in the power of government, resisting its tendency to claim the entirety of life. But they also pull us out of ourselves and teach us to engage generously with others. As families and religious faith break down, the power of the state grows. Government fills in the spaces left behind by mediating institutions. The individual is freed from his traditional obligations, but he inherits a harder master in the state. Left to itself, as Tocqueville saw, democracy tends towards a kind of soft totalitarianism in which even a person's most intimate concerns, from his sexual relations to his religious convictions, are swallowed by the political process. We now live in a country where marriage, family, and traditional religion all seem to be failing. And inevitably, support for democracy itself has dropped. Listen to this, fewer than 30% of U.S. millennials think that it's vital to live in a nation ruled democratically. Less than 30%. Nearly a quarter of those born in the 1980s or later see democracy as a bad way to run the country. And nearly half of Americans surveyed feel that experts, not government, should, quote, make decisions according to what they think is best for the country. Undemocratic feelings have risen, especially among the wealthy, who think they know better than everyone else, I guess. This didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. We've behaved ourselves into this mess by living a collection of lies. And the essence of those lies is summed up in the so-called mystery clause of the 1992 Planned Parenthood versus Casey Supreme Court decision upholding the Roe versus Wade abortion decision. Writing for the majority in the Casey case, Justice Anthony Kennedy claimed that, quote, listen carefully, at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, and of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. This is the perfect manifesto of a liberal democratic fantasy, the sovereign self-creating self. But it's a lie. It's the very opposite of real Christian freedom. And to the degree we excuse or cooperate with it, we make ourselves liars. The Gospel of St. John reminds us that the truth, and only the truth, makes us free. We're fully human and free only when we live under the authority of the truth. And in that light, no issue has made us more dishonest and less free as believers and as a nation than abortion. I always come back to it because that's where we always end up. People uncomfortable with the abortion issue argue, quite properly, that Catholic teaching is bigger than just one issue. That's true. Other urgent issues also need our attention. Being pro-birth is not the same as being pro-life, and being truly pro-life doesn't end with defending the unborn child. But it does begin there. To borrow some words from one of Notre Dame's distinguished alumni, quote, abortion has been the beachhead for an entire ethic that is hostile to life, hostile to marriage, and as we see from the HHS contraceptive mandate, increasingly hostile to religion, religious Americans, and religious institutions, end of quote. Abortion poisons everything. There can never be anything progressive in killing an unborn child or standing aside tolerantly while others do it. In every abortion, an innocent life always dies. This is why no equivalence can ever exist between the intentional killing involved in abortion, infanticide, and euthanasia on the one hand, and issues, important issues, like homelessness, the death penalty, and anti-poverty policy on the other. Again, all of these issues are important, very important, but trying to reason or imply them in having the same moral weight is a debasement of Christian thought. This is why so many Catholics, Notre Dame needs to hear this, beginning to his credit with Bishop Rhodes, the bishop of this diocese, were so deeply troubled when Vice President Biden received the university's Laetare Medal earlier this year. For the nation's leading Catholic university, that's who you are, to honor a Catholic public official who supports abortion rights and then goes on to conduct a same-sex civil marriage ceremony just weeks later is, to put it kindly, a contradiction of Notre Dame's identity. It's a baffling error of judgment. What matters isn't the vice president's personal decency. He is a decent man. Or the university's admirable intentions. I'm sure they were very admirable. The problem, and it's a serious problem, is one of public witness and the damage it causes both to the faithful and to the uninformed when things like this happen. I mention this less to criticize than to encourage. Unlike so many other institutions that describe themselves as Catholic, Notre Dame really is still a deeply Catholic community, not just in its marketing, but in its soul. I met your teachers and your administrators, Brad Gregory, Mary Keyes, John Cavadini, Gerard Bradley, Patrick Deneen, Ann Astel, Father Bill, Miss Campbell, Carter Sneed, Nicole and Richard Garnett, Christian Smith, Francesca Murphy, Dan Philpott, our own Dr. Munoz, and so many others. And the Holy Cross community, wonderful group of men and women. So many extraordinary scholars. And they privilege the Catholic community with their fidelity, their intellects, and their service. Of course, from those who receive much, a lot is expected. It's quite stunning to walk this campus and see the beauty of the buildings, the scope of the new stadium, the new organ in the chapel, the energy of the students, and the constant pace of growth. But I hope Notre Dame never stops examining the fundamental why of its mission. What kind of success is really success? It seems to me that we already have a Princeton, a Stanford, and a Yale. We don't need a Catholic version of any of these. What the church needs now is a university that radiates the glory of God in an age that no longer knows what it means to be human. What the people of God need now is a university that fuses the joy of Francis with the brilliance of Benedict and the courage, fidelity, and humanity of the great John Paul. I said at the start of my remarks that the task of renewing the life of our nation requires a different kind of people. It demands that we be different. The power of the powerless, Václav Havel once wrote, consists not in clever political strategies, but in the simple daily discipline of living within the truth and refusing to lie. Surely, there is no better way to begin that work than here and now. And creating the different kind of people we need is and should be the mission of this university. That's in your hands. Thanks for paying attention. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think I went on for about 40 minutes. You want to introduce the question and response period? Okay.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. We'll be talking about that for a long time, I'm sure. We have 2 microphones on either side, held by our fellows. Today's lecture is being recorded. It will be broadcast by EWTN. So if you have a question, I ask that you come to a microphone. We need you to come to the microphone for your question to be recorded. And we have a tradition at the Tocqueville program. We always invite our first questions from our undergraduate students. So any undergraduates with a question? And Michael set a good example for us. Introduce yourself and tell us where you are in the program.
Hi, I'm Michael Moss. I'm a senior here at Notre Dame. I'm also a fellow with the Tocqueville program. Anything else?
Are you available in case any of the young women are interested?
We'll pass on that one.
That's kind of a basic question. You asked if there's a...
That's very generous of you, Archbishop. So my question for you is, so how can we communicate truths about human nature to a culture that has largely assumed a language of emotional and experiential testimony as the method of discourse?
Well, it seems to me that the first place to begin is to live lives and have relationships with people that are emotional and attractive. And then you can enter into a conversation after you engage people on that level. We have to meet people where they really are. So the church has to be attractive on that very level. But can't be satisfied with being only on that level, because living in that level you can be superficial, and you need to move much more deeply into the real issues. But the place to begin is providing, I think, especially for young people, communities of peers that are attractive, not critical of other people, not boring, but attractive, full of life and energy. And then, because, St. Augustine, St. Irenaeus said that famous saying that, that the glory of God is human beings fully alive. And not only is that the glory of God, but it attracts other people. So we begin by doing that, and then we aren't satisfied with that. We move into more meaty issues. You can respond to what I say and ask for more or be critical.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Now, are you available? He is, young ladies, he is.
We were preparing Michael for the Dominicans.
Oh.
Honor, yeah.
Sorry about that, Dominicans, He's sitting next to one.
Please, anyone who has a question, come forward to the microphones.
I won't embarrass the rest of you, promise, I promise.
How do you inspire people?
How do you inspire people?
How do you inspire people in this day and age?
Well, the church has always lifted the saints as examples of inspiration for us. And there have been more saints canonized in our lifetime than in the whole history of the church prior to that, because there are a lot of them. We know more about them today than we did before because of the mass communication that we have and the fact that the world is different parts of the world are easily in touch with other parts of the world. And the church has always pointed to that group of people as those who can change our lives by inspiration. Now, I read the life of a saint often. Every year I read the life of St. Francis. I read the life of St. Augustine. I'm a Capuchin Franciscan in my origin. I'm a bishop now for the last 26 years. So I really do find reading those lives extraordinary. Also, I belong to a bishop support group. We have support groups too, like the rest of the people. And we get together 5 times a year to pray and criticize each other's lives and to share our lives with each other. Well, that's like marriage, right? You love each other, but you criticize each other for good and for growth. And I find inspiration from that. I had lunch today with a group of your professors here, and I was very inspired by that. So I think you have to keep your eyes open, but also provide occasions for inspiration by looking, but also if you're in charge of something, provide those that you're responsible for with object lessons that inspire them. I think that's how you do it. Did you want to say something further?
I guess I'm asking the question, how do you inspire people to action?
Oh, how do you inspire people to action?
How do you get them
Well, I give talks like this once in a while. But I think, again, we do that don't we? I mean, you do it at your neighborhood when you have your friends over for dinner. They shouldn't be just moments where you show off your wealth or your charm, but they should be moments where you encourage people to do good work that is transformative of society. That's why we get together, in order to move things along. It can't be just for fun. It has to always be moving things for the kingdom of God. So I think that there's many opportunities. Those of us who are priests have the duty to do that every Sunday. We don't succeed all the time, in our Sunday homily. But those of you who are parents, sending your students, your kids, to universities like this is a way of encouraging them to make something significant of their lives. Those are the ordinary things. But as Mr. Havel says, I quoted him, it's in those ordinary things that we make a difference in life.
Please come up to the microphones on the side.
You can just line up and save time. And we'll just cut you off if you talk too long.
And we have a microphone on this side.
Yeah. All the beautiful girls on this side and all the guys on that side.
Warner, make sure you identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Warner Graff from New Jersey, 86 grad.
Nice to meet you, Warner.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Two parts of your conversation. The first, you talked about the politics, and you put the two candidates in relatively the same unfavorable light. And then later you said that it all comes back to abortion. Abortion is everything. We have one candidate which is clearly adversarial to abortion, or clearly adversarial to pro-life issues.
Always adversarial.
Always adversarial.
Worse and worse every year.
Idolizes Margaret Sanger and so on. And then you have another candidate who
used to do that.
yes, who professes, well, to be fair, used to do that, and unless you do not believe him, is pro-life now. So I'm curious why such a neutral stance on candidates out of the gate instead of acknowledging one who's pro-life and one who isn't.
Because I believe what I said about both of them. You know, I think that they're both very problematic. That doesn't mean you can't vote for either one of them. You have to make that judgment yourself. But I'm not going to modify my criticism of Mr. Trump because Hillary's worse. You know, and she is, I think. She is worse. You know, and those who want to vote, you know, picking the least of two evils might have good reasons for choosing one or the other. But sometimes you can't accept either because of fundamental issues. You know, we also have, I mentioned the Supreme Court justice issue. We have a promise on Mr. Trump's part to appoint Supreme Court justices like the ones that have been supportive of the issues that the Catholic Church deems very important. And if he's elected, I hope he actually does that. But that can give people a reason to vote one way or another, too. But I'm not going to limit I mean, Mr. Trump is problematic, I think. And I can't lie and pretend he's not. So I understand what you say, though. And I'm often criticized by people who used to like me because I haven't supported Trump. But I can't.
But even with his pro-life stance, it's not.
I don't know if I believe him. You know, I don't know if I believe him.
Archbishop,
I don't think he's lying, but I think he's taking a position that will win him votes. There's a little difference between that and lying.
Hi, my name is Tracy Shira. I'm an undergraduate junior classics major and philosophy minor. And my question, I'm very interested in politics, and so my question is, if our society has devolved into one which does not uphold or appreciate Catholic values, then how is a Catholic to be elected in the public sphere, assuming that those who are elected as politicians uphold the values of the public sphere? Do you think that this is possible to be a Catholic?
You get too many questions. You're giving me too many questions.
Thank you. Sorry, it's just a continuation.
Is it possible to be a
but
good Catholic and be a political?
to be elected as a
Yeah.
good Catholic, and if you are elected, to enact that change and be able to withstand the secularizing influence of DC?
Well, I think for a Catholic to be elected today, you have to be very clever, where you don't lie, but you don't necessarily highlight the things that would divide you from a whole lot of people, and that the opponent would fix on in order to be extraordinarily critical. I think some have done that successfully. We have some very good political leaders who have been faithful to every element of their Catholic tradition. So I think it's possible. I think in some parts of the country, it's very difficult to be pro-life and get nominated by either party. In some parts of the country, it's impossible to get nominated if you're pro-life by the Democrats. You know, it's just impossible. So, but after you get through the primary, there's some chance, of course, I think, to being elected nationally. And I think if we can't be good Catholics and be elected, then it's better to go to heaven than to go to hell, so you just don't expect to get elected. If you have to make that choice, but I hope we don't think we have to make it. We keep trying, make things better, improve things incrementally, maybe move to a different state where you can get elected. It does mean things like that. Or changing the party. If Catholics had been serious about the life issues, we could have kept the Democrat Party from becoming pro-abortion, because we are numerous in that party. And we allowed ourselves to be co-opted by the other side, And has had terrible results for our country because we wanted to fit in. We didn't want to be different, you know. And the only place we should worry about fitting in is to heaven.
My name is Joseph Pinto. I'm a sophomore here. In Professor Munoz's class this past Tuesday, we had a long talk concerning the rights of transgender persons in society. And I'm curious your opinion on how the University of Notre Dame can respect transgender rights, yet still maintain single-sex dorms and our Catholic ideals while maintaining the rights of transgenders and their human dignity in and of themselves.
Well, I think the answer is to respect transgender people with the equal respect that we show to any human being. We should show all human beings the same kind of respect and dignity. And people who are transgender should show the same kind of respect to those who disagree with them. Now, when it comes to the politics of working out issues like bathrooms and bedrooms, those aren't rights. We don't have rights to go to a particular bathroom or to go to a particular dormitory. We have a right to be treated with dignity and respect. But we also have a duty to show dignity and respect to those who disagree with us. So in some ways, I think if we're honest and not captured by political correctness, we'll just do what we think's right and not worry what the world says. Now, unfortunately, universities have a hard time doing that because they feel tremendous pressure from alumni and other kind of forces. For example, if people decided they wouldn't play football here because of the school doesn't allow transgendered people to go to the bathroom of their choice, which has happened in other places, right? What would your university decide to do? Those are difficult issues. I know they're very difficult, and I can be cavalier up here and act like they're not. But I think we should fall victim to talking about people have a right to use a particular bathroom. Why? Why would you ever think that's a basic human right? Some people don't even have bathrooms. So I don't know if my answer is adequate to meet your question, but that's what I think. And the fact that we worry about this issue shows how far we've been dragged in a certain direction already. So thank you for your question.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Sunny Orris. I'm not a student. Here from Orlando, want to visit with my family. My question concerns religious rights, not only for Catholics and Christians, but for all religions. We're at a time in our society where we are fighting for our religious freedoms as Christians and as Catholics, but other religions are rightfully doing the same things within their own, governmental and societal spheres. The difference being that in some of these religions, the basic tenets of their teachings are at odds not only with human rights that we've come to expect in this country, but in a lot of countries. So how do you reconcile what is right? Whose freedoms, I guess I should say, trump the others, to use a phrase? These people in different religions fighting for what they think is right and for influence in the public sphere as well. But as Christians, when we see the difference in our religions, how do you reconcile that in a democratic society?
Well, through democracy, through voting, both personal voting and also the voting of our legislative bodies. Every issue is decided that way. Whether you wear a helmet when you ride a motorcycle or not are political issues where people have different opinions, and the way you come up with a policy is you vote on it. You convince people and then you vote on it. And I think it's how those things work out in a society where there's all kinds of value systems that clash with one another. I think that's what you do. And then if the government makes decisions contrary to basic Christian principles, you go to jail rather than break your commitment to God. That's what you do. I mean, we don't always win. Truth doesn't always win either. Truth sets us free, but it doesn't always win. It doesn't set us free from jail. It sets us free from selfishness. Now, those are basic principles. But in each case, how do you work that out? Like the Mormons had to work it out on the issue of multiple wives. And our country didn't let them let Utah enter into the union unless they changed their practice of polygamy. And then they did. But see, it was a debate and a decision was made at the end of that.
My name is Susanna, and I'm a visitor from Italy.
From where? Italy.
Yeah.
Piacere.
I'm a student in American Catholic history, and I'm here visiting the archives in Notre Dame, and I'm just so happy to have had the chance to come to this meeting because down there I quite feel an outcast for holding views such as you've just mentioned. And so my question is, well, I'm making it a little bit too dramatical, but I mean, I really feel I'm in a good place, and I'm just curious about what your perception is of how things are going in the West globally. So what do you, I'm sorry, maybe the audience is not really interested. I'm doing some egoistic question, I don't know, but I did wonder about what kind of perception do you have of the church and in general Catholic Christianity in Europe, and because of the fact that we don't have a pro-life movement the size you have, and whatever. What is your idea about this? What do you think? What do you think we can do, and so on? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm not an expert on European history, but it seemed like World War I and World War II took the hope out of the lives of many people in Western Europe, and they don't have much fight for principles in some ways. And I think that's in some ways what's happened there. I certainly don't think what's happened in Western Europe is a model for Catholic growth. The most recent reports out of Germany show that less than 10% of people go to Mass anymore. And in the United States, when I was your age, 75% of our people went to Mass on Sunday. Now, more Protestants go to church on Sunday than Catholics do in the United States. So in some ways, we're following the pattern of Western Europe, and that isn't good for us. I think when you have a lot of money, which Western Europe has, and which we have in the United States, it alters your relationship with God and also alters your relationship with other people, and things begin to fall apart. And, it's really the poor are much closer to God than those of us who are wealthy, because they need God and we don't. Now, some people say, well, that's just proof that, God is the opium of the people who suffer, and it's not real. But no, I don't think that's true. I think it's, God is blocked out by having possessions. The scriptures tell us that the love of money is a source of all evils. Not money, but the love of it. And we love possession, we love money. Western Europe is at least as bad as we are, if not worse. And I hope we don't go down that path of increased secularization and indifference towards life. I mean, Europeans don't have children. They don't. I mean, that's why in England, all those boys are Muhammad rather than John. And that wasn't a statement against the Muslims, it's a statement against Christians and Catholics who don't have children. So we're in trouble. Okay.
Hi, I'm Brian.
Brian.
I wanted to follow up on what's your name, was it right? Joseph's question, because I don't think you answered it.
Okay.
His question was not about bathrooms and that sort of thing. I think his question was, if we look at transgender people, right? Like the Catholic Church is basically saying, either you are a person created by God in this way, and you're living out your life, or you're lying. So how does the church minister to those people when that is the sort of choice that you have set up with that premise?
Well, you set up a choice that I wouldn't agree to, that God made you this way, and or you're lying. There are people who are confused, who aren't lying, but God didn't make them that way. If you study the medical evidence today, okay, it's minimally mixed, and certainly doesn't support the public position of people who are promoting the transgendered agenda. And you're promoting it yourself by saying either you're lying or God. That's not true. People are confused. And people who have sex change operations very early in life have very miserable lives for the most part, statistically. And many of them, if they had waited, wouldn't have made that decision.
I feel like what you're saying might have something to do with this. That is how it's done. You understand?
Well, I know, but if someone feels something doesn't determine my speaking the truth. You know, you certainly are free to speak your truth, and I hope you always do. But give me the freedom to do the same, and don't accuse me of bigotry because I do, you know. Because the truth is the truth, right?
Yes, I don't agree with you. Yes.
Well, you don't have to. I don't demand that you do. But I don't agree that you have either. So you need to accept that. Thank you. We have to be mutually respectful of each other's positions. Good. Thank you.
My name is Kathleen. I'm a grandma. I'm local. And I'm changing the topic a little bit. Earlier you talked about loving the saints, and I wanted to know if you've considered the possibility of opening the cause of canonization for Benjamin Pettit.
I don't know anything about that.
Father Benjamin Pettit.
I know who he is, but I don't know anything about the canonization of him.
Okay. I don't know how these things work, but there are some people that are praying for that.
The way that's usually done is by the local bishop of the place where the man or woman dies, and who observes the natural devotion to the person that's part of the life of the faithful, would begin to do a study and bring that to the attention of the church. And that's how that would happen. So that should always begin, the church is very conscious of the local devotions as part of that devotion. And people pray for miracles and those kind of things. So,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Two more questions.
So hi, my name is Brennan Dewar. I'm an undergraduate here. So Archbishop, my question, Philadelphia, like so many dioceses around the country, has been affected by the sexual abuse scandals. And with your, discussion of sex, that scandal has caused the church to lose ethos to speak on this in so many people's eyes.
Sure.
So my question is, how do you think we can bring back that credibility to speak on issues of sexual morality when the church itself has failed in this way in the past?
Well, I don't know if we can bring back credibility, but if you didn't speak about any issue unless you were perfect in the issue, none of us would have anything to say about anything. Parents could never correct their children, for example, because they're never perfect, or if they had done it once themselves, you shouldn't say you can't do it again to your children. So I think what we need to do is not be afraid of the past, do all we can to correct it, change it, minister to those who suffer because of it, but that shouldn't keep us from speaking. If it does, we're cowards. The truth is the truth, whether we live it or not. And I think the reason why we have the penitential rite at the beginning of every Mass is so that we might convert and change. But if we didn't, if we feel that we can't change unless we constantly stay at the penance rite, we never celebrate the Mass. And the same thing's true about these kind of issues. We need to really repent and change, but then we need to move on, and then repent again, and then move on, and then repent again and move on. So I'm not saying you say you're sorry once and then move on, but you don't keep saying so much that you never do anything else. And I think the proof of what the church teaches is in the happy lives of those who follow the teachings of Christ. You bet.
Hi, thank you for that. I'm Cody Devine, a senior here at Notre Dame. And I actually want to follow up with what you were just talking about, sort of conversion and change. Are there any areas specifically that you think within the Catholic faith that we need to be more open to re-examine ourselves before we start to talk about those in a more, following the question about more democratic society? So are there any areas where self-reflection may be needed in our own Catholic faith at this point?
Well, I think all issues require self-reflection. I mean, I don't have a list to give you, but I don't think any of it should keep us from speaking what we think Christ wants the church to speak. So, I don't think failure requires silence. I think sometimes failure proves what you know to be true and gives you grounds to speak more clearly and loudly, actually. So I don't know, but we need to be constantly converted on all levels of life, on all levels of church life. But that doesn't mean we jettison the past. It means that we try to be more faithful to the root traditions of the church, which have their origin in the teachings of Jesus. He wants to talk again. No. Okay, I thought you reached for the microphone. Okay, you bet. Dr. Munoz, thanks you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Archbishop. Thank you for coming to our inaugural Tocqueville lecture on religious liberty. Good afternoon.